pleased to have you today for our roundtable. There are a lot of things happening where you are posted, sir. And so we're very eager to talk to you about them. But before we start, maybe we can hear an update from you about the current status between Philippine-China relations.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to have this discussion with you and your team. As for an update on Philippines-China relations, as you know, there are a lot of challenges and opportunities that are confronting the bilateral relations, particularly since the outbreak of the pandemic. Basically, what has happened now is that cooperation on the pandemic has assumed the most important position in terms of the agenda of bilateral relations. And right next to that is, of course, the post-pandemic economic recovery. These are the two most important items right now in terms of the bilateral agenda. In terms of pandemic cooperation, of course, we have seen how China has cooperated with the Philippines in terms of providing medical supplies, medical equipment. China has also facilitated and approved more than 60 Philippine Air Force transport jets landing in airfields in South China, ranging from Fujian, Guangdong, and also some commercial flights in Changsha and Shanghai. So East and South China, over the past almost more than half a year, the South China has become an air bridge for cooperation in terms of pandemic control. There was a Chinese medical team that went to the Philippines, of course, to introduce their experience in handling the pandemic. And upon the request of the Philippine side, the Chinese are also preparing their foremost expert on pandemic control, Dr. Jungnan Shang, who led the anti-pandemic fight here in China on the medical side. There will be a webinar organized so that he could exchange experience with his counterparts in the Philippines. Now, aside from this, of course, there is the aspect of how to recover from the pandemic in terms of the economy. Well, the Chinese, in a sense, have shown the way. They've been able to control the virus outbreak here in China. There's still clusters here and there, but on the whole, domestically, the virus outbreak is under control. As a matter of fact, there is a boom in domestic tourism, so it's possible now to travel within the country, although the door to international tourism, both coming in and going out, are still closed. Because from the Chinese perspective, the main threat, as far as they can see, it comes from cases coming from abroad. Either what they call imported infections by Chinese who've lived abroad and are coming back, or foreigners who come to China. So a lot of the cases that's been detected has actually been at the airports or the port area where there are international sailors that also disembark. And recently, they've focused more on food staff because an outbreak in Beijing in last June, which actually infected more than 300 people. From their analysis, it started in a wholesale market, right in the Beijing suburbs, and they traced it to some imported seafood. So that is the situation here. Domestic tourism. Actually, matter of fact, I was able to travel already to South China, to Xiamen, to attend a conference on Chinese investment, on promoting investment to the Philippines and other parts of China. A lot of other ambassadors attended, and recently to Shanghai for the China International Import Expo. You see, what's happening here is that because China's doors are basically still closed to the outside world, um, a lot of our officials cannot come and participate in this
Mm.
conference or trade fairs. So they mobilize the diplomats here locally. The different countries do that. So it's really the ambassadors and the diplomats stationed in China who attend these trade fairs. And next week I'll be going to Nanning for a China ASEAN again expo, a trade expo. Of course, there are still challenges when it comes to the South China Sea, when it comes to the code of conduct negotiations, also in terms of restarting or continuing, pushing forward with the different infrastructure projects that the Chinese have either provided on the basis of a gratis aid or in terms of loans. And all of these have been affected by the pandemic, but now there's a big push to start to restart, to continue working on this and to catch up in terms of their timelines. So that's an overview in terms of the situation, in terms of the bilateral relations. I'll be ready to take your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think I should have opened with this earlier, but pardon me for my lack of manners. But how are you, sir? I hope you and your family and your staff at the
Uh,
embassy are safe.
well, yeah, in terms of the embassy, it's actually very good in terms of
Okay,
there is nobody who has gotten infected.
that's
In
good.
terms of the community in China, generally it's also been the case. There have been 23 cases of COVID infections in the Philippine community, but most of them actually are what you call imported cases. In other words, they are
Ah,
seafarers on either Chinese or international ships, and they come to China to either unload goods or to disembark or to report to back to port. And when they disembark and they're given the test, some of them have turned out to be positive. So they've been treated, they've been quarantined and treated, and all of them actually, all of them have recovered and either have gone back, or there's one or two that are waiting for the flights for their agents to book them on their flights home. In terms of Filipinos working here, there's been one case. He actually got stranded in Manila during the Wuhan days and during the Chinese Spring Festival. He went home for a vacation, and then he came back several months after. And then when he landed at the airport, it turned out to be positive. But so he was hospitalized. His unit took care of his hospitalization, and he's recovered and he's back to work. And the same with another case. The big problem actually for the Filipino community is during the difficult months, those 3 months, 3 or 4 months when China was grappling with a virus outbreak, a lot of their work units either closed down temporarily or
mhm.
some other actually closed down permanently. So they lost their jobs or their incomes. They were not being paid sufficient income. So we had to provide some help. And a number of those who have lost their jobs have gone back now. We've organized repatriation flights for them. There's actually a big chunk. It's several hundreds and probably more than 1,000 Filipinos working in China who have not been able to come back from the Philippines. And there were efforts to organize to bring them back here, but it was only last month there was another effort. But the Chinese then, the China is now very conscious of what's happening in the outside world in terms of the second wave. So they've
Yes.
built a defense uh, around their, it's like an outer defense. And basically they've suspended all visas with very
Wow.
few exceptions to enter China. So very few foreigners, even Filipinos with work visas or valid visas as of early November, these visas and have been suspended until further notice. So I expect China will, in a sense, while promoting domestic travel and discouraging international travel, they'll hunker down for this winter season, the usual flu, pneumonia season, because they expect there may be, they want to guard against the possibility of a second wave. Personally, in my case, I'm fine. It's just that I can't go home because of the flight. And if I go, the 14-day quarantine in the
To be
Philippines,
quarantined.
I may not be able to come back. So I haven't been able to come home since February, when I went home for the Chinese New Year and then came back in time for the repatriation of the Filipinos in Wuhan.
Sir,
Otherwise, it's the same problem for our diplomats here in China. It's a
yeah, well,
difficulty. They're safe, much safer, I think, probably here, but they miss their families and their loved ones in the Philippines, especially with the coming Christmas season.
well, the good news, Ambassador, is that you have not missed any LaSalle games.
Mm.
Yes.
So, sir, can you give us a glimpse of of life in China now? Are people wearing masks? Are restaurants and bars open?
Well, I'm not wearing masks because I'm indoors
Okay,
here,
but
embassy, in residence.
yeah,
But
but people on the street
it's no longer required.
no longer require.
But
Okay,
Mm.
no longer required. But people, out of an abundance of caution, actually wear masks when they go out. It's still they still ask you to wear masks when you go down on the subway and in the public transport where there is a crowd inside malls. There you see a lot of people wearing masks. Uh, Now, recently, I participated in Shanghai in the International Import Expo. How it was an example of how to conduct an international trade fair amidst the pandemic. When I was giving my opening remarks when the launch of the Philippine Pavilion, I took off my mask to read my speech. But right after I finished my speech, the authorities were reminding the organizers, please tell your ambassador to put back the mask. And then as you go on the exhibit, everybody's wearing a mask. And they do remind you if you're not. And all those who will enter the hall, there's this huge hall in Shanghai for this import expo or other trade fairs for that matter. Visitors are required to have a swab test, a negative swab test.
wow.
So that's how it's strict control, but looser travel, looser rules. But again, it's the new normal. How to guard
Right.
against the virus that you have been able to put under control and prevent it from resurging. At the same time, for people to be able to enjoy go back to some sense of normality while wearing a mask and maintaining self-distance.
Red, you want to ask some questions about the vaccine?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Ambassador Santo Romana.
Yes.
Yeah, we have reported on the paper, and of course during our press conferences with our health officials and of course the FDA, that currently the Sinovac vaccine is already the one who is advancing towards a potential phase 3 trial here in the country. But according to Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Berhere and FDA Director General Eric Domingo, they are only needing a few documents from Sinovac in order for them to consider holding the trials here in the country.
Yes.
Mr. Ambassador, have we talked or have Sinovac already coordinated with your office, with the Philippine Embassy, regarding those documents that are being needed by the DOH and the FDA and the vaccine experts panel? Because that is the only thing that they are already waiting before they can finally consider the vaccine to hold
Phase 3.
phase 3 trials here in the country, sir.
Okay. Actually, our embassy, of course, helps a lot to facilitate the contacts with Sinovac and Sinopharm and the other Chinese pharmaceutical companies that are engaged in vaccine development. So we are in touch with them. But Sinovac also has a local partner in the Philippines, and so they have their own way of dealing with the FDA. As for the data, okay, Sinovac, we sent it back home already, provided us, and they also published it publicly in the Lancet. It's a peer-reviewed article on the results of their phase 1 and phase 2 trials. And that's why they're applying for a phase 3 trial in the Philippines. They're also conducting phase 3 trials in other sites, Brazil, the Middle East. I think they're also applying in Indonesia. They have also they're conducting it also in Turkey. So they're gathering. It's the information we have is that they have 60,000 volunteers who are going, international volunteers who are undergoing the phase 3 experimental trial in different parts of the world, and they want to publish the results of the phase 3 soon. As I understand, they have to submit it to their own Chinese FDA, because FDA here in China will have to approve it for general use. Very recently in China, as you know, they have approved it for emergency use. As a matter of fact, in China, there are at least 3 vaccines that have been approved for emergency use, meaning they're being given to what we call the frontline workers uh, in the hospitals, airport personnel that have to deal with the incoming passengers, uh, port personnel that have to deal with the imported products, as well as the military, as well as businessmen, Chinese businessmen who go out, and Chinese engineers who have to go out on to carry out the projects and to carry out international business, as well as students. Over 1 million Chinese have undergone vaccination on this emergency basis. So back to your question, Sinovac is certainly working on that. And as I said, the results for phase 1, phase 2 trials that they have conducted have already been published at the Lancet in the recent issue, early this week, I believe. And we have provided copies to the IATF through the DFA.
Mm-hmm. And sir, how about Sinopharm? Because there are conflicting reports or conflicting statements that was shared to us by during our previous press conferences, that at first they wanted to do a clinical trial in the country, but now they want to skip the trials and go ahead with the procurement phase. So the DOST is kind of confused right now on what will Sinopharm do here in the country. Will it be going for clinical trials or for the main procurement of the vaccines? Do you have any communication with Sinopharm on this, sir?
We have contacts with Sinopharm. We have ongoing discussions, but we try to facilitate any direct conversations on procurement or other matters that have to deal with DOH, DOST, or IATF to facilitate direct communications. But as far as I know, Sinopharm tried in the beginning to apply for clinical trial in the Philippines. For some reason, there were some factors or hurdles that ran in the way, and they also got absorbed with other countries that were, very much willing to expedite the process. And so they have done it now with other countries. In the Philippines, they don't, unlike Sinovac, Sinopharm does not have a local partner. And that complicates the issue a bit. They're not, as far as I understand, they are not planning to do clinical trial in the Philippines, but they're willing to sell for procurement. Mm-hmm. So that means that they are willing to share. In other words, they're waiting for they have to apply for approval from the Chinese FDA, and the results of FDA, if that's acceptable to the Philippine FDA, then and the Philippines is willing to buy from them, they're willing to consider the Philippines. And as a matter of fact, very much willing to do so. But they want to know, of course. And everybody else would like to know soon because, of course, there are different countries talking different companies. That's the situation between those two Chinese pharmaceutical companies.
And sir,
Ambassador, what's the public acceptance over there of these vaccines that are being developed? We've been hearing the ones developed by Pfizer and Moderna over in the U.S. They seem to have some very promising results with very high efficacies. And still, the concern in the U.S. and elsewhere is whether or not people are willing to take them. But what's the mood over there?
Well, China, actually, there's very little resistance to it. As a matter of fact, there's a high level of willingness as far as we can figure out. Well, for example, they've started this vaccination process on an emergency use basis since June or July. June for the military, July for the frontliners and for the outgoing businessman and for students and so on. And there is a demand from the general public. I mean, recently there were 2 or 3 cities where there are certain cities that offered it to those who are willing to pay for it, and there was a long line, and they couldn't demand. So they've tried to control that right now. I think pending the approval, which seems to be imminent. I think it's expected in the next couple of weeks or at the latest by next month. A Chinese FDA approval for general use of the 2 or 3 leading vaccines in China, which have already been used for emergency use. And now the question now is to ramp up production and to start giving it, to the general public. Those, of course, those who are willing to go to have to be vaccinated, and also because China has promised. I mean, Chinese President Xi Jinping promised that he would make it accessible to the international community with priority, of course, to the Philippines, other ASEAN countries, and other neighboring countries. So they're already talking about allotments for different countries, but of course, be subject to agreements and discussions on a bilateral basis, as well as they participated in the COVAX facility, the international facility that was set up by the WHO, and so the Chinese are going, in a sense, on all cylinders in terms of pushing forward, in terms of vaccine development and preparing for vaccine deployment. So yeah, although I don't have a survey data in front of me, just from observation and from state media, as well as from discussions with Chinese officials and Chinese friends. As a matter of fact, some Chinese officials, I think, those who go out a lot, they say so, and they say so privately that they already have been vaccinated, and so they still wear a mask, they still wear precautions in case, but yeah, there is seems to be a high degree of acceptance here from the media reports from the 2 medical companies. From the 1 million that they have given the vaccine, there's been no report of a serious adverse reaction. They've talked about mild symptoms like headache or a pain in the place where it was a vaccine for a while, but no, they're saying publicly no serious adverse reaction. And there was even one story they were referring to. This was in the case of the Sinopharm executive, the chief executive, that how it was given to several dozen employees that were working in a certain foreign country, and there were out of like 80 plus, there were 10 who did not want to be vaccinated. But then the virus outbreak became serious in that country, and none of those who were vaccinated got infected, whereas some of those who were not
Wow,
vaccinated got infected. So, so that's
interesting.
what state of the knowledge right now, state of knowledge here in terms of what I know about the vaccine.